And we're back for part 2 of our video on chapter 12. Let's see if I can waste less time by talking to an imaginary audience. I don't know how like Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert and all those late night hosts can keep making those shows and have no audience. I feel like a crazy person every time I make these videos because I'm just talking to myself. Okay. But anyway, recap. So Chris found out that his dad had second family. Now, what's weird is Marcia, the woman that he had a kid with after Chris was born, was still technically his wife, and Billy, Chris's mom, was not. But Walt kept a secret from both Marcia and Billy and lied to them both and had like these two families going on at the same time. But they had hoped, since years and years had went by, that it was behind them. It was not. Now, should I wear my motorcycle helmet while I read the second half? This thing big. I got a big old head. It's got a lot of padding, so if I fall over, it won't damage my precious, precious brain. Okay. So let's get back into it. Chris has found out and he's being very withdrawn from his parents now. Almost like angry with them. Because he found out his dad's a big liar, and that's one thing Chris didn't like, was liars. Okay. Chris was the sort of person who brooded about things, Corinne observes. If something bothered him, he wouldn't come right out and say it. He'd just keep it to himself, harboring his resentment, letting the bad feelings build and build. That seems to be what happened following the discoveries he made in El Segundo. I've said it like 4 times now, suddenly I can't say it. Children can be harsh judges when it comes to their parents, disinclined to grant clemency. And this was especially true in Chris's case. More even than most teens, he tended to see things in black and white. He measured himself and those around him by an impossibly rigorous moral code. Curiously, Chris didn't hold everyone to the exacting standards. One of these individuals he professed to admire greatly over the last 2 years of his life was a heavy drinker and an incorrigible philanderer who regularly beat up his girlfriends. Chris was well aware of this man's faults, and yet he managed to forgive them. He was able to forgive them, or overlook the shortcomings of his literary heroes. Jack London, the notorious drunk, Tolstoy, despite his famous advocacy for celibacy, had been an enthusiastic sexual adventurer as a young man and went on to father at least 13 children, some of whom were conceived at the same time as a censorious count was thundering in print against the evils of sex. So Tolstoy was a hypocrite, Jack London was a drunk, and Wayne Westerberg was a drunk that beat up his girlfriend all the time. But Chris could seemingly forgive these guys, but he couldn't forgive his father for some reason. Like many people, Chris apparently judged artists and close friends by their work, not their life. Yet, he was temperamentally incapable of extending such leniency to his father. Whenever Walt McCandless in his stern fashion would dispense fatherly admonishment to Chris, Corinne, or their half-siblings, Chris would fixate on his father's own less than sterling behavior many years earlier and silently denounce him as a sanctimonious hypocrite. Chris kept careful score, and over time, he worked himself into a collar of self-righteous indignation, and that was impossible to keep bottled up. After Chris unearthed the particulars of Walt's divorce 2 years passed before his anger began to leak to the surface, but leak it eventually did. The boy could not pardon the mistakes his father had made as a young man, and he was even less willing to pardon the attempt at concealment. He later declared to Corinne and others that the deception committed by Walt and Billy made his entire childhood seem like fiction. But he did not confront his parents with what he knew, then or ever. He chose instead to make secret of his dark knowledge and express his rage obliquely in silence and sullen withdrawal. In 1988, as Chris's resentment of his parents hardened, his sense of outrage over injustice in the world at large grew. That summer, Billy remembers, Chris started complaining about all the rich kids at Emory. More and more, the classes he took addressed such pressing social issues as racism, world hungers, inequities, and the distribution of wealth. But despite his aversion to money and his conspicuous consumption, Chris's political leanings could not be described as liberal. Indeed, he delighted in ridiculing the policies of the Democratic Party and was a vocal admirer of Ronald Reagan. At Emory, he went so far as to co-found a college Republican club. Chris's seemingly anomalous political positions were perhaps best summed up by Thoreau's declaration in Civil Disobedience. I heartily accept the motto, the government is best which governs least. Beyond that, his views were not easily characterized. An assistant editorial page editor at the Emory Wheel, he authored scores of commentaries. In reading them half a decade later, one is reminded of how young McCandless was and how passionate. The opinions he expressed in print argue with the idiosyncratic logic, and they were all over the map. He lampooned Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden, called for the resignation of Attorney General Edwin Meese, lambasted Bible thumpers on the Christian right, urged vigilance against the Soviet threat, castigated the Japanese for hunting whales, and defended Jesse Jackson as a viable presidential candidate. So he was all over the place with his political views, which isn't bad. I mean, you should look at people's policies and decide if you want to vote or follow them or not. Where was I just? Jesse Jackson. And typically a moderate declaration that led sentence of McCandless's editorial on March 1st, 1988, it reads, "We have now begun the third month of the year of 1988, and already it is shaping up to be one of those politically corrupt and scandalous years in modern history." Chris Morris, the editor of the paper, remembers McCandless as intense. To his dwindling number of confers, McCandless appeared to grow more intense with each passing month. As soon as classes ended in the spring of 1989, Chris took his Datsun and on another prolonged extemporaneous, there we go, trip. "We only got 2 cards from him that whole summer," says Walt. "The first one said, heading to Guatemala. And when I read it, I thought, oh my God, he's down there to fight the insurrectionists. They're going to line him up in front of a wall and they're going to shoot him." Then toward the end of the summer, the second card arrived. And it said, "Leaving Fairbanks tomorrow. See you in a couple of weeks." It turned out he'd changed his mind and instead of heading south, had driven to Alaska. The grinding, dusty haul up the Alaska Highway was Chris's first visit to the far north. It was an abbreviated trip. He spent a short time around Fairbanks and then hurried south to get back to Atlanta in time to start the fall classes. But he had been smitten by the vastness of the land, by the ghostly hue of the glaciers, by the pellucid subarctic sky, and there was never any question that he would return. During his senior year at Emory, Chris lived off campus in his bare Spartan room, furnished with milk crates and a mattress on the floor. Few of his friends ever saw him outside of classes. A professor gave him a key for after-hours access to the library, where he spent much of his free time. Andy Horowitz, his close high school friend and cross-country teammate, bumped into Chris among the stacks early one morning before graduation. Although Horowitz and McCandless were classmates at Emory, it had been 2 years since they'd seen each other. They talked awkwardly for a few minutes, and then McCandless disappeared into the corral. Chris seldom contacted his parents that year, and because he had no phone, they couldn't easily contact him. Walt and Billy grew increasingly worried about their son's emotional distance. In a letter to Chris, Billy implored, "You've completely dropped away from all who love you and care about you. Whatever it is, whoever you're with, do you think this is right?" Chris saw this meddling and referred to the letter as stupid when he talked to Corinne. "What does she mean, whoever I'm with?" Chris rallied to his sister. "She must be effing nuts. You know what I bet? I bet they think I'm a homosexual. How did they get that idea? What a bunch of imbeciles." In the spring of 1990, hold on for a second. We're really learning or seeing a different side of Chris. At the beginning of the story, we see Chris as like this happy-go-lucky kid that just wants adventure. And now we're seeing this deep-seated animosity that he has within him. In the spring of 1990, when Walt, Billy, and Corinne attended Chris's graduation ceremony, They thought he seemed happy. As they watched him stride across the stage to take his diploma, he was grinning ear to ear. He indicated that he was planning another extended trip, but implied that he'd visit his family in Annandale before hitting the road. Shortly thereafter, he donated the balance of his bank account to Oxfam, loaded up his car, and vanished from their lives. From then on, he scrupulously, avoided contact either with his parents or with Corinne, the sister with whom he purportedly cared immensely. We were all worried when we didn't hear from him, says Corinne, and I think my parents' worry was mixed with hurt and anger. But I didn't really feel hurt by his failure to write. I knew he was happy and doing what he wanted to do. I understood that it was important for him to see how independent he could be. And he knew that if he'd written or called me, Mom and Dad would find out where he was, fly out there, and try to bring him home. Walt did not deny this. There's no question in my mind. If we had any idea where to look, okay, I would have gone there in a flash, gotten a lock on his whereabouts, and brought our boy home. As months passed without any word from Chris, and then years, the anguish mounted. Billy never left the house without leaving a note for Chris posted on the door. Whenever we were out driving and saw a hitchhiker, she says, if it looked anything like Chris, we'd turn and circle back. It was a terrible time. Night was the worst, especially when it was cold and stormy. You'd wonder, where is he? Is he warm? Is he hurt? Is he lonely? Is he okay? That is a horrible thing to do to your mom. And this is when I start to realize awesome that Chris lived by his ideals and followed them full force. Horrible what he did to his family. In July of 1992, 2 years after Chris left Atlanta, Billy was asleep in Chesapeake Bay when she sat bolt upright in the middle of the night, waking Walt. I was sure I had heard Chris calling me, she insists, tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't know how I'll ever get over it. I wasn't dreaming. I didn't imagine it. I heard his voice. He was begging, Mom, help me. But I couldn't help him because I didn't know where he was. And that was all he said. Mom, help me. That's rough. It's rough. Every time I read it, it's rough. I could not imagine being that mother. But okay. So that was chapter 12. That's all we'll do this week, because Thursday and Friday, I think we're supposed to have off, or that it even matters. I will say, God, I do. I miss you guys. I miss being up in front of that class. I don't want a 5-month-long summer. It's miserable. It's not only miserable because I can't go anywhere. I like seeing you guys every day. I like giving you guys a hard time. It's like one of the best parts of my day. And it's like I've told you guys a million times before. I've never walked into that school and it felt like a job. It's starting to feel like a job. And I don't like it. But vigilance. We'll be fine. Things are going to be fine. On the plus side, you guys got out of writing a research paper this year. Lucky, lucky, lucky. Maybe I'll double it up next year. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, miss you guys. I hope everybody's doing okay. Remember to keep social distancing. I know that it's just bombarded every day in your life. It's like social distancing, social distancing, social distancing. But, and I'm closing this computer because that light. If we do these things, the more we do it, the more we stay away from each other, the quicker this will be over with. I would love if I even got a week or two back to see you guys. But we're just going to have to roll with the punches and see what happens. Okay. Be safe, everybody. I'll talk to you guys next week. Also, don't forget, if you have any questions or comments or anything, you can comment on the YouTube videos and be like, Macaulay, that was stupid. You're doing horribly. Stop rambling and just get on with the reading. And Google Hangouts, it's like text messaging to my phone. It goes right to it like a text message. And emails. Other than that, hope you guys are doing okay. Hope everything's going well. Miss you guys. I'll see you next week. Later.